all these like things makes me think about, the power of presenting something live that you have no way but have to be confronted with what is in front of you. And that's what I think the social power of it.
Welcome, friends. I'm Kristen Martin, and this is Torches. Today, we have the always inventive Jeanette Yew. Jeanette is an award-winning multidisciplinary lighting and projection designer, as well as creator of her own original puppetry works. She has also just been recognized with the United States Artist Fellowship. I'm really excited to speak with her today. Welcome, Jeanette.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, yay.
Yay.
So how did you come to be in downtown performance?
I actually went to Cal Arts for my grad degree, and then I was very lucky that I got a Hemsley lighting internship. So it brought me to New York City. And the very first thing I did in New York was Janie Geiser's Frankenstein
At
here Art Center before the renovation in the Dots Theater.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that's what brought me to downtown, like literally my very first show. And then, from there, I was able to get into, I think the Chocolate Factory opened up not too long after that. So I did a show there at Chocolate Factory. And then, of course, I did a bunch of show at here, done some stuff at La Mama. And I think that the connection with like Cal Arts, like I did the Solography 24 Plays series with Eric N. So it just all kind of flowed within like the downtown neighborhoods and knowing people, and I just was able to do things. Oh, and also I did Ophelia, which is with Aya Ogawa, with the first renovated. I think we were the first in the renovated main space. And actually since then, Aya and I now have like 20 years of like collaboration relationship.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
We had Aya here yesterday, so she was talking about what an important collaborator you are to her work.
Oh,
yes.
Thanks.
You just mentioned Janie, and I think you studied puppetry with Janie.
Yeah.
So how did your training as a puppetry artist feed into your work as a designer?
I think the most important thing about puppetry that feeds into it is the fact that puppetry is a total design. Like you have to, it's a little bit like a feedback loop. You have to think about what story, you start with like, what do you want to do? And then you have to go make the puppets, because without it, you kind of can rehearse it, like with humans already come, being able to ready to rehearse.
They can move their arms,
yeah, exactly.
They can talk.
Exactly.
Yes.
With puppets, like, you kind of have to make all those things happen. And then in that process of making, your ideas then also shift because of the making inform you of what you're actually able to do. So it's like this constant feedback loop. And I think that as a result, I'm not locked into only thinking about in a straight line way, because I think that a lot of times design with like particularly more traditional process have like a straight line, right? You start with somebody writing the play, and then you talk about what ideas, what the design look like, then you rehearse, then you tech, then show, right? Puppetry just isn't like that. It's never a straight line, and you just constantly discovering. And so I think that it informed me as being a designer to constantly being able to be in a feedback loop, and which I think is very important, in the current field of theater, and also I think in the future of theater making, So yeah, and I actually also want to say that I started with puppetry with Miss Aurora Valentini in Seattle, who was a Italian American puppeteer who like have passed away. She was already up in her 60s when I take classes with her at University of Washington. So it's only by chance, because University of Washington at the time have a puppetry program, and that's what makes me got interested into begin. In the beginning, and then eventually went to Cal Arts and studied with Janie.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
So devising is definitely a part of puppetry, and it's also been a part of a lot of the work that you've been part of. How is that interesting or challenging to you?
If I can rule the world, I would say all theater making should be devising.
Yes.
Because I just think that like like it changes it from, I think that it changes it from like an art form versus like a product. And I think that there are times that we treat theater, particularly, we treat the theater, its result, like the actual performance as a product, which on some level I understand. But what really interests me as a theater artist is actually the process. And I think that that part should always have this devising energy, which is really about the feedback loop that I'm really interested in. Then we can examine, what does this choice mean, and is this the best choice in what we're aiming for, and if we change this, what else are we then changing? I think that those questions should always exist. It's just that I think that we codified it in the devising process as like that's allowed when you're devising versus when you're doing, the importance of being earnest, but there was no devising,
Right, and you're supposed to stay in your lane as a designer.
Yeah, and because what really interests me is actually the process of making, because at the end of the day, this is what I teach at NYU, and I tell my students all the time that at the end of the day, it always comes down to, should this light be 10% brighter or 10% less bright, which is kind of a boring question to answer. But before then, it's all the exciting question, because every question lead into different possibility.
Yeah.
So that's why I like devising, and I think that really informs. I treat every process kind of the same way, just a matter of like how much latitude people let me do that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think designers in the kind of theater that I like to do are really important dramaturgs to the creation of work. And one of the reasons I've always loved working with you as a designer is how much you bring in terms of thinking of the whole project and where the project's going and the intentions of the project. It's less about the lighting conversations and more about those global conversations that are about the work. How do you feel that is, I think you just talked about it a bit, but is there more that you would add about that latitude to bring dramaturgy and not staying in your lane as a designer, but bringing the dramaturgy to the table?
Yeah. I use the term visual dramaturg. I always feel like that I'm responsible for all the things except literally the words that is coming out of the actor's mouth. Because like this whole entire aura of the visual is part of the thing that I'm really interested in. And and I would consider sound, even though sound is like audio, as part of the visual dramaturgy, because you conjure imagery. It's like, to me, it's like, is this experience as human, it's impossible for us to not come up with imagery. Right. It's been proven that that's how we always think about it. We may want to intellectualize it to think that words have like a priorities, but really what we're experiencing is imagery that inform us and give us sort of feelings, right? That's the experience of it. And I think that that's what makes me very excited when I'm as a designer. It's like I'm creating like visual dramaturgy. What is it that is not being said directly that I am helping to bring into this discussion or this experience or this dialogue with the audience, is the part that I really like doing.
Are there other things that make a collaboration truly generative for you?
First of all, I think as a designer, we have to be very adaptive, right? Because the thing that interests me is actually the variety. I think that's what uniquely make, I think, a theater artist and designer is that we're interested in the variety of things. So therefore, we are able to enter the room and be able to engage with who are the collaborators in the room and who are they as human beings. And I think that that's, depending on what that chemistry is what affecting the collaboration itself. So every project is like a chemical reaction with who is in the room. And also like any moment in the room, there are like time and space that the chemistry shifts. When you're intact, the chemistry shifts. the same group of people, that chemistry shift than when you were like sitting around the table and sort of ruminating,
Yeah.
and so it's hard to say. I think it's really about what that chemistry is in the room. And the thing that I also, I speak a lot in terms of teaching, because I think I don't separate out teaching as who I am. And I find that teaching is a way for me to understand what a process is for me.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I say to my students sometimes is that I said that part of the most important thing about being a collaborator is to know why you're in the room and what do you have to offer into the room.
Yeah.
And an example that I give was, let's say I'm a hammer. I can certainly enter the room to think about the fact that as a hammer, I hit things. I'm going to look for things to hit. Versus, I know that I'm a hammer. I can look for things to hit, but I'm also made out of wood and metal. So I can set myself on fire on the wood, or I can melt myself down and form into something else, right?
Right.
And depending on what else is happening in the room, I will make those choices in the collaboration, and that itself, that process of figuring that out is very exciting to me.
That's fantastic. I love that. I want to melt myself down and reform into a whole new structure.
Exactly. Or I can become the nails that I hit, you
Right,
know,
yes.
by reforming it. Yeah.
So how does the collaboration change when it's an artist that you've worked with for many years, like Aya, for example? How does that deepen the way that the dialogue happens or the way that the art is made?
Well, I think that there's always like a comfort level of inquiry, right? Because I think that when it's just human nature. When you first meet somebody, you're probably less open to like say, I don't think that's going to work, versus someone that you work for a while. There's a certain amount of comfort that you feel safe, right? With the people that you work with before, you feel there was a certain baseline understanding. I think the challenge, of course, is become like, how do you not become predictable?
Yes.
You know, and I feel like that the fortune.
How do you keep challenging each other?
Exactly, yeah. And I think that is the part that requires more work, actually. The more that you know someone, the more that has to be worked on, you know. And that, I think one of the things that I try to do, because this morning we actually have our first meet and greet for Meat Suit, you know. And I was thinking about, wow, Meat Suit as a piece of work is so different than Ophelia. And that recognizing that we have also journey as artists, and then how to like meet the work, not just meet the person, but meet this work now, and figuring out what that is, you know. And I think that that's exciting, because with the constant rotation of collaborator, you don't get to see like a history of the development of your collaborator and that work itself also. And I just was reflecting on how, wow, I was a different person designing Ophelia.
Yeah.
And I is a different artist since Ophelia, and that we were able to kind of continuously evolve together, which is great, which is exciting.
I'm curious also just about the relationship with other designers that you collaborate with. Like I know you and Jen have done a bunch of projects together with Kaborko and also with Aya, right?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, with Aya, with Kaborka. Over the years.
So how does that make it easier and Jen is a set designer, so how does that make it easier when you are working with the same co-designer on a project in different ways?
I mean, Jeanette is a very exciting person. Like, she's very fun because she's always very honest.
Yeah.
That's like,
it's true.
Yeah, that's one of the great thing about her. So from the very beginning, it was nice to be able to be kind of feeling like honest from the get-go, you know, which is good. And I think that similarly, right? I think that I would say that Jeanette have a very strong architectural aesthetic. But I do think that her approach in the room have shifted as an artist, you know. And I think that it's similarly, we are all able to evolve together, because we actually literally started with doing actually opera with Isabel Malinsky. That was when Hofstra, when we first know each other. And then we also like both were teaching at Stony Brook for a while, so we actually have multiple different kind of stages of relationship.
Crossovers.
Yeah, and it's, I think that similarly she also have shifted in the way that like she make her work, you know, and I guess at the end of the day, I think that I just value the idea of like growing together, you know, moving forward together, you know, in some way.
Yeah.
Similarly with you.
Yes, absolutely. I think we've done, I don't know, 6 or 7 projects as director designer, but also a bunch of other projects as a producer designer relationship. Yeah. I'm grateful for that. You've worked at a lot of different scales. You've worked on like small stuff like it here. You've done big opera projects. You've done installation performance. How does your work in those different contexts change?
I think it changed just in honestly resource. You know, but I would say fundamentally, I don't change my process. So the way I think about them is the same. It's just bringing in different experiences, you know, and different kind of resource. Like for example, when I did Life and Trust, we because it's over 100 different environment and it's like in a warehouse, 5 floor, there's no grid. And so in that case, I have to learn how to spec all really small things. In fact, I think at one point my production electrician said that Four Wall, which is this big nationwide lighting company, actually have like a national meeting to talk about who is this designer that bought out all of like a specific type of stuff. Like they were like, why is everything from the whole entire country going to New York this week? like, you know, like it was very, you know, I was going like, wow, I have no idea. There was a meeting, yeah. And so I think it's the resource changes. My artistic process is the same. And obviously the logistic and the producing structure is different,
right?
You know, in different things. And also depends on like, it depends on this. I think that once you go outside of sort of quote unquote traditional theater, then the who are the artists involved becomes very important. I would say like, for example, when I did Aquifer of the Weave, in Chocolate Factory, it was just a solo artist who does the artwork and the music together. And so that, like, even though it is an installation-based work, is very much embroiled in the entire artistic world at all times.
Right, yeah.
Because of just, it is just about the art very deeply. And with Chocolate Factory, they support that. They produce it that way. First is something like installation based, like Life and Trust, for example, because it is like ultimately have a much more commercial producing aspect to it. Then the producing envelope becomes much more complicated.
Right.
So as a collaborator, I have to also navigate that.
Yes.
You know, in a when it goes outside traditional theater, those becomes very unexpected. Like you may find yourself all of a sudden like having to like have an emergency meeting with the producer,
right?
Where in a normal traditional work that doesn't really usually happen, you know. Just because the structure is just different.
How have institutions supported or not supported your work?
I don't think I'm being considered as a traditional puppetry artist. So I don't think that people consider my work necessarily puppetry. And part of it is deliberate, because I think as a puppetry artist, I like to challenge what actually is a puppet.
Yes.
And so I think traditionally people would not consider my work puppetry. So institutionally, I think that the puppetry world aren't always looking at it that way. So I don't necessarily get a lot of support in that sense. Okay. But as a designer, I feel pretty supported institutionally. Although I do think that the field weirdly is getting harder because just money.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of that, I was very surprised by, I do to say, I'm very surprised by USA. I was like very happy and excited. And
Should
it's,
be recognized for the contributions that you've made. So
Oh,
I was
thanks.
thrilled to learn that.
Thanks. Well, it's good because I'm about to pioneer a new piece actually with a choreographer named Phil Chang. He actually gave me a prompt last year about what if we flip the process where lighting is the driving force of a piece of choreography.
That's
So
exciting.
yeah, so it comes in like a good time because we were talking about like finding places to experiment with it and
Did
things
you
like
get to
that.
see Jennifer Tipton's piece that was up at Baryshnikov that was lighting leading? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. I heard
Yeah,
amazing
it's really
things about
wonderful.
it.
It was
Yeah,
really
I
wonderful.
hope
Well,
that
I'm
they.
really excited to see what that's going to be.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have a couple of different talk. Yeah, we have like a couple of different things that we're interested in thinking about. So yeah, so come at a good time.
Yeah, fantastic. Is there more puppetry work that you're working on right now that you're hoping to bring into the world soon?
There was a piece that I've been thinking a lot about that it is based on the book of Genesis, and I've been thinking and urban planning, and the goal of the piece was basically having audience build a world together that
Oh, I love
puppets
that.
can inhabit, and then we're going to destroy it, and then
Revelations?
Yes, revelation, exactly. And then we're going to have a conversation about what are the priorities when we build a city.
Wow.
Yeah. But my biggest thing that I'm trying to figure out is like disappointing audiences is really hard, and I want to figure out how to do it with care, so that they're willing to then have a conversation.
Disappointing them in the sense that they've created something and it gets destroyed as part
Yeah,
of the work.
yeah,
I see. On
yeah.
a nightly basis.
On a nightly basis. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and that the impetus
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it came from this thing about prison. To me, it was about the idea of building halfway houses, and everybody in theory support halfway houses, but then nobody want the halfway houses.
In their neighborhoods.
In the neighborhood?
The NIMBY thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just kind of feeling like that I want to pose the question of like, what do we actually believe in as a community? You know, which I think is a very hard conversation to face.
Yeah.
You know,
Are you reading particular urban planners or you're just reading a spectrum of stuff? Okay.
yeah. It's been actually in the work for like a couple of years
Great.
in my brain, and it usually takes me like, I would say 5 to 7 years to ruminate on an idea, to figure this out, like what I want to do. So
Great. Going back to institutions for a sec, if you could change one way that institutions operate, what would that be?
I have a very practical thing,
Yeah.
which is every theater set the schedule of how we take the show without ever considering what are the priorities.
Yes.
I was always kind of like, can we just talk about who have priorities to do what when, and then we figure out how we take a show.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very practical thing.
Right. And I feel like I've learned this as a producer over time, and that at Here we actually had a process where as we were growing the work, we would talk about the tech schedule before it was set with the designers, and we would talk about what the performance schedule is. But the project we're doing right now, that didn't happen.
No.
And so we're all in this point of stress about how we're going to get everything done in the time we have.
Yep.
You know, in a world where we're all trying not to do 12-hour days anymore, we're trying to work 8-hour days. And yeah,
Yeah, well, and I think that that's particularly true because I was like in the middle of attacking the connector with Beowulf, and I was like talking about this, and in particularly in this new world, which I agree, I don't want people to work 12 hours a day.
Right,
I
yeah.
want people to have a break. I
Yes.
don't want to have overnight paint call. Like
Yes. No.
I'm completely in agreement that those things
Shouldn't
are not
happen.
like shouldn't happen. However, the consequences of it is that, you know, Beowulf and I are talking about, like, we do lose like a whole day of tech, right? Like in aggregate, right? And we
unless the producers choose to spend more resources
Exactly.
on the tech. Like it shouldn't be at the cost of lost tech time. It should be an increased cost to
Exactly,
the production.
right? Yeah, and and similarly, like when I was doing the show at RT, we couldn't paint the deck for like a whole week because we don't want to have overnight paint call, right?
Right.
So we're gonna wait until the day off for paint to come in, but that means that I have a whole week of people keep going like, well, can it not be that bright on the floor? And I keep having to go like, it's not going to be this one.
When the floor's painted.
Yes. But I can't, like,
Right.
without
For a lighting designer, painting late is a really big problem.
Yeah, so
Yes.
so I just want us to like be able to like understand like what these things mean and then make a choice so that everybody in the room can have the understanding.
Yes.
That's all.
That's very reasonable.
That's the thing I want to change.
Why can't we learn that?
I don't know, even like, and this happened like in school, right? I have a meeting today, like they said, okay, slot number 2 will always have 31 hours of tech time and slot number 3 will have 48 hours. And so I said, well, what happened if a faculty want to do a musical in slot number 2, which only have 31 hours of tech time? And then then it's a challenge for my student
Yes.
to finish the work,
Yes.
right? And I'm kind of like even in school, we don't
Pay attention to
pay
that.
attention to that.
Right. And that's not about resources in the same way.
Yeah.
It is, but I understand there's limitations, but it's it's not union pressures and all these other factors that happen in the
Yeah.
outside world. You've spoken about the importance of theater as like a social force, as an activist lever. Can you talk about why you think of it that way or what's important to you about that?
Well, I remember, so I have this weird, funny way to get into theater, where I grew up in Hong Kong. When Hong Kong, there's not a whole lot of like high school theater. Like my entry to theater is not that same entryway. And I remember watching Waiting for Godot when I was 12.
Were you bored?
No, I was actually, I don't remember anything. I certainly don't know what it means.
I saw Annie when I was 12.
Do you know what it means? I'm just kidding. But I remember that there is a sense of like we all experience something together. And I remember the collective holding of breath
Right.
when like that whole last moment when they go like, well, is Godot going to show up? And then the kid said, nope, he's not going to show up like again today, right? So I remember those moments really vividly. And that fast forward to when I was in University of Washington. I was my undergraduate actually in business administration accounting. I have a moment that I realizing, this is really funny, that taxation policy can shape social behavior.
Huh.
And the two things collided in my head to kind of go like, oh, a live theater experience can shape social behavior and understanding. And and then fast forward a couple more years, I no longer want to be like involved in making taxation policy, but involved in making theater. That makes me feel like, I remember like the very first piece I get involved in when I was in Seattle was actually a piece about rape. And we have the most bizarre experience because the artist, the actor, go naked at one point, very vulnerable. We have it was the weirdest audience. That one night, there was only 4 guys who all somehow heard that there was someone naked on stage to come see the show.
No.
But it was like that moment, right? That like somehow like theater had this like the good and the bad power
Yes.
of like, but what was really amazing, like it was terrible audience, but what was really amazing was like the performer said that I'm not going to shy away from this because these men need to know what this piece is actually about. That they thought that they heard someone getting naked, right? And it was like the most, because we knew about it ahead of time in the box office, and actually the house manager said, "What do you want to cancel?" Because like clearly these
Right.
4 people is odd. you know.
Wow.
And we have a whole discussion, and she was like,
They were
"No."
coming together?
They're coming together.
Oh, I see.
They come
Okay.
together, and they were the only, because it was like, it was like Seattle Fringe Theater in like a second floor somewhere. Like, it's not like it's not one of those that you're gonna have tons of people come to see a show. And it was like on a Wednesday night, something like really kind of put it that way. And but it was really amazing to actually watch the four guys being very uncomfortable and have this experience. And it just, all these like things makes me think about, the power of presenting something live that you have no way but have to be confronted with what is in front of you. And that's what I think the social power of it exists, and it exists in all sorts of level, right? Like whether it is commercial level or, a piece with four guys sitting there, on a Wednesday night. It will directly impact, and there's a direct conversation with the people in the room.
Has your identity or lived experience shaped your aesthetic?
I think because I think I don't come from a traditional theater background, so I don't have any preconceived notion of what constitute theater. I did not go to, I went to University of Washington. I did study drama at the time, but I didn't finish my degree because someone offered me a job, and I thought I'm going to be rich with $24,000 a year. At that point in time in my life, I was like, yes, no student loan, $24,000 a year. So then I went back because of I went back in such a different way, and I started out with Fringe Theater in Seattle, and then I went to Cal Arts. So I think the biggest thing about me is that I don't have a preconceived notion of you should always do this because this is how it always been done. And that is helpful because it allows me to then meet the work as what the need of the work is, versus thinking that, there was a right proportion in how things are supposed to look, or you always need to make sure that you have a warm and a cool light when you light people, that kind of things.
Right.
So I think that my non-traditional background kind of affects how I think about approaching the work.
And how do you think about success, and has that idea of success changed over time?
No, because I think I went back to Cal Arts because I didn't want to live in a world of what if. And that was the main reason, because it was getting to the point where I was doing it in Seattle, and I was like, I just don't want to worry about whether I'm quote unquote going to be able to make it. I just want to do it. And because I come from a different background, I was just delighted that I was able to do it. So so it didn't occur to me of how can I be successful? I was just glad every day I was able to kind of keep doing it, you know. In the teaching world, I do encounter a student asking me how to be successful. And I think that if I were going to say anything about it, is this: I think that you can't let other people define it for you. Because I just think that are you happy doing the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
I think that's, as long as you're happy, I think that's successful.
Yeah. I like that self-determination. Because there are so many things that you can use as measuring sticks that can be discouraging, or they lift you up one week and they shatter you another week. And so I think it's really important that it be from your own measure. Because
I also just think that there's also on some on the more fatalistic way, right? Is that I have no control over it. At the end of the day, right? If I'm chasing after award, chasing after money or status, in this field there are so many of what we do is out of our control. I don't know why an audience would or would not come to see a show. I can make them.
Yeah.
And it just, I think it's really hard if you try to let that to be your guiding post.
Yeah, or if you get this critic instead of that critic, where you know that critic would really love the piece, but you knew this critic was not going to be their cup of tea, but that's who got assigned.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was actually a really great documentary. I think you've probably seen it with Dan Hurlin, where Dan Hurlin talk about like his piece about futurists and about how the piece got killed by New York Times,
Right.
you know, and like it just, and I saw the piece, it was fantastic, and you know, and Dan's work,
it was a really special piece.
yeah, you know, and there's no doubt that Dan is an accomplished, well respected, talented artist. There's just like there's no doubt about that. But that's just kind of how that happened. You know,
What would be a thing you would think of that would make a designer's life more sustainable in the American theater world?
That's a very complicated question. I mean, like first thing is like everybody will always say more money, right?
Yes.
You know, I've been doing this a while. Are there exceptions? Yes. But by and large, I don't think anybody is sitting on a pot of gold and just don't want to give to people. Right? Like, I just don't think that institution is doing that.
Right.
Again, there of course will have exception, but by and large, I don't think that is. So I just don't know if money is the only thing.
Right. Yeah.
The thing that worries me a little bit right now is that I think that the number of work from experimental to accomplished is definitely on the decline. And the lesser the amount of work, the more competitive it make, and then the sustainability question becomes even more complicated.
How do you think the academic industrial complex contributes to that with putting out so many people when there aren't enough jobs?
100%. This is actually one of the reasons why I have concluded that I like teaching undergrad more than teaching grad school. Because to be honest, even as someone who've gone through grad school, I would say that grad school contributed a lot to that dysfunctionality. And undergrad, at least I feel like I'm just training them to be a citizen, and then whether they become theater person or not, you know, they have their lifetime to figure that out. But I think because, you know, sometimes I say to students, I said, look, teaching is a job. They give me money, and like institution will want to preserve that, right?
Yeah.
Because the people teaching in the university want to keep that job. It's, you know, so it is a complex, sadly.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, it's interesting when you look at places like, I mean, like during COVID, we had basic income here in New York for a certain number of people through Creative Rebuild. They've done it in Seattle. They've done it in San Francisco as temporary pilots. I think Seattle and San Francisco still have it going on. Ireland does it for a lot of artists, like a universal basic income. I just wonder if there's a way to reframe the system that would take this different pressure off of artists.
Yeah. I think that globally, right, this is the whole, I think this becomes a question about like globally, what is the responsibility for the citizen? You know, it's like one of the thing like since the Affordable Care Act, it makes design union less necessary, right? Because for the longest time, you join 829 because you want to get insurance.
Right.
But with ACA, I know a lot of artists, particularly young artists who are not wanting to join the union yet, now have the option of joining ACA for that, right? So as a field, if we advocate for a global sustainability, then it will also help us in become more sustainable.
In just in our country.
Just in our country.
Right. Thinking of the whole context.
Yeah, if everybody have access to affordable housing, then it is not about me needing to make enough design income to pay rent.
Yeah.
Which is a high cost in New York City for
Totally.
artists.
Yeah.
Healthcare, food, access to food, like that, just basic. If we can establish that, then it take the load off. Because I also don't think that we can just solely look to the field itself to support all of it.
Yeah, no, I think that our government has responsibility and we as citizens have responsibility.
Yeah.
Because artists help us frame our existence. Help us.
I did an exercise when I used to teach a lot of non-major. I did an exercise once about like imagine a world without art, and I don't mean it in philosophically. I said literally, like I said that literally.
Right.
And then very quickly, people were kind of like, well, then what happened to music? What happened?
Gone.
Yeah, what happened to what I wear tomorrow?
Gone.
Like, I said that, do we even have like advertisement? Like, isn't that an aesthetic of some sort? Do we have different design of soup? Like,
Right.
Right? And you're realizing that it is actually not as optional as everybody like said
Frames
it out.
it.
Yeah. I wouldn't even know what color to paint my wall. Like, if there's no art, it's like, do we have color? Like,
Right.
So, but I think that fundamentally that's the challenge. I don't think that as a society we look at art that way, as an essential thing.
Do you think the spirit of downtown still exists?
I think there is. I think there will always be a downtown. Because I think that if we let real estate define what is downtown, then we already lost the battle. I think we should just, to me, downtown is a space where we can be freely experiment with no attachment or worry about, whether people are going to like it, whether critics is going to come, how many weeks am I running this show, right? It's like, I think that's, to me, that's like part of that downtown energy. And downtown is about discovering like new artist voices, like I in that vein I think about Paul Pinto, because I just think that he's such an artist, but also like a musician who just decided that I'm going to do this work, alongside him being a musician. And I think that that's what downtown is. It's like a chance for people to try something and do something and find ways to redefine themselves in some way. So I think that there will always be a downtown that is not real estate.
Thank you so much for doing this, Jeanette.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It was great.
Yeah, I hope I didn't babble too much.
You did not. Thanks to you for joining us, and thanks to HowlRound for hosting, and we hope you'll come back to more of Torches.